Could the silent betrayal of a childhood companion echo through the long decades to define the ultimate destiny of an entire nation? Today, we rank the events surrounding Khaled Hosseini's masterpiece as the 45th most significant cultural turning point in modern chronicles. We commence our analytical journey into the heart of Afghanistan, a territory where honor and profound guilt are woven into the very fabric of the soil. This narrative is a deep exploration of human redemption and historical trauma. As we navigate through the ruins of Kabul and the thoroughfares of Peshawar, we witness the collapse of an era and the birth of a global epoch. Welcome to a detailed scientific study of history, culture, and the resilient Afghan spirit. Let us examine the precise geographical and social foundations that set the grand stage for this epic saga of friendship and betrayal. This is the chronicle of a kite that ascended too high and the boy who spent a lifetime attempting to retrieve it. We will dissect the complex layers of Afghan identity, from the Pashtun heartlands to the marginalized Hazara communities. This documentary serves as a definitive academic record of a nation's struggle for self-definition. Our analysis spans nearly a century of turmoil, starting from the stability of the monarchy to the devastating impact of the Taliban regime. We invite you to witness the hand-on experience of a nation in transition. Afghanistan occupies a critical geopolitical crossroads of diverse civilizations, spanning approximately 652,230 square kilometers of extremely mountainous terrain. It serves as a vital bridge between the Middle East and South Asia. The rugged Hindu Kush Mountains cover about three-quarters of the country, creating isolated valleys that have fostered unique tribal identities for millennia. These natural barriers have historically hindered central political control over the provinces. The capital city of Kabul sits at an elevation of 1,790 meters, surrounded by dramatic mountain ranges. It has long been the political and cultural heart of the nation, acting as a melting pot for its diverse ethnic groups. In the early 1970s, Kabul was a bustling metropolis where tradition met modernity. The city's markets were filled with goods from across the globe, reflecting its strategic importance on the ancient Silk Road trading routes. The affluent Wazir Akbar Khan district, where our story begins, was home to the city's intellectual and political elite. It symbolized the progressive and secular aspirations of the Afghan upper class during the peaceful monarchy years. The complex social hierarchy was dominated by the Pashtun majority, while the Hazara minority faced systemic marginalization for centuries. This ethnic friction remains a central theme in understanding the personal and national tragedies. The Hazara, a Persian-speaking Shia minority, have roots in the central Hazarajat region. Historically, they were subjected to severe discrimination, often working as servants or manual laborers for the Pashtun ruling class in the cities. Pashtuns, who make up roughly 42 to 45% of the population, have historically controlled the Afghan state since its inception. Their tribal code, Pashtunwali, emphasizes concepts of honor, hospitality, and revenge that drive much of the plot. While Islam is the unifying faith of 99% of Afghans, the sectarian divide between Sunni and Shia Muslims has often been exploited for political ends. This religious tension further complicated the existing ethnic disparities. Data from the early 1970s indicates that the Hazara population faced significant disadvantages in education and political representation. These systemic inequalities created a volatile social landscape that would soon be shattered by war and revolution. The reign of King Zahir Shah, commencing in 1933, is often remembered as a golden age of relative peace and stability. Under his 40-year rule, Afghanistan embarked on a slow but steady path toward modernization and international integration. The king balanced the influence of the Soviet Union and the United States, securing billions in foreign aid for development projects. This era saw the expansion of Kabul University and the emergence of a vibrant, Western-educated middle class. In 1964, a new constitution established a constitutional monarchy, granting women the right to vote and opening the door for democratic participation. It was a time of immense hope for the nation's future as a modern state. Kabul University became a center of political activism, where liberal, Marxist, and Islamist ideologies competed for the minds of the youth. This intellectual ferment would eventually provide the catalyst for the radical shifts of the late 1970s. However, the benefits of modernization were largely confined to the urban centers, leaving the vast rural population largely unchanged. This rural-urban divide would become a major fault line in the coming decades of conflict. In the provinces, tribal law often superseded the authority of the central government in Kabul. This disconnect between the capital and the countryside was a significant factor in the later resistance movements. The economy remained primarily agricultural, with roughly 80% of the population engaged in farming and animal husbandry. This traditional lifestyle was deeply rooted in the land and resistant to rapid social change. Despite the rural dominance, the government initiated various industrial projects with the help of international aid. These efforts were aimed at creating a self-sufficient national economy and reducing dependence on foreign imports. Afghan artisans continued to produce world-renowned carpets and textiles, preserving centuries of cultural heritage. These crafts were a vital part of the nation's identity and provided livelihoods for many rural communities. Religious and cultural festivals brought the diverse communities together, fostering a shared sense of national belonging. These celebrations were moments of joy and unity in an otherwise complex and layered social landscape. Prior to the 1970s, the educational system was slowly expanding, with a focus on creating a skilled workforce for the nation's development. However, access to higher education remained a privilege for the urban elite. The intellectual life of Kabul was vibrant, with a proliferation of books, newspapers, and journals. This era of free expression allowed for a diverse range of political and social ideas to be discussed and debated. The city's art scene flourished, with local musicians and artists blending traditional Afghan forms with Western influences. This cultural synthesis was a hallmark of the progressive and cosmopolitan atmosphere of the era. Investments in public health led to a slow increase in life expectancy and a decrease in infant mortality rates. These improvements, while modest, were a sign of the government's commitment to the well-being of its citizens. Afghanistan's foreign policy was characterized by a careful balance of power between the major global players. This strategy allowed the nation to remain neutral and secure developmental assistance from both the East and the West. The era of monarchy came to a sudden and bloodless end in July 1973 when Mohammed Daoud Khan overthrew his cousin, the king. Daoud abolished the monarchy and declared Afghanistan a republic, with himself as its first president. Daoud's republic initially enjoyed broad support, but soon faced internal challenges from both the left and the right. His authoritarian style and suppression of dissent alienated many of the intellectual groups that had initially supported him. Despite his attempts to modernize the country, Daoud's dependence on Soviet aid grew, creating tensions with his own nationalist base. His efforts to centralize power only further alienated the traditional tribal leaders in the provinces. The early 1970s saw a rise in political polarization, with various factions competing for influence within the new republic. This instability would eventually lead to the radical and violent shifts of the late 1970s. On April 27, 1978, the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan launched a violent coup known as the Saur Revolution. President Daoud and his entire family were executed, marking the beginning of the nation's descent into chaos. The new communist regime, led by Nur Muhammad Taraki, attempted to forcibly transform the country through radical land reforms and secular decrees. These policies directly challenged deeply held religious and tribal values in the countryside. Between 1978 and 1979, the regime executed thousands of suspected opponents to crush resistance. The systematic elimination of the religious and social elite created a vacuum of leadership that would be filled by radical insurgents. The PDPA's radical social engineering projects, while ambitious, were met with fierce opposition from the conservative rural population. This backlash would eventually evolve into the Mujahideen resistance movement. By the end of 1978, various parts of the country were in open rebellion against the central government in Kabul. These early resistance groups were motivated by a desire to preserve their traditional way of life and religious identity. The internal purges within the PDPA further destabilized the regime, with Hafizullah Amin eventually seizing power from Taraki in a violent struggle. Amin's radicalism and paranoia only accelerated the nation's collapse. Documents from the era show a regime that was increasingly isolated and dependent on Soviet military support for its very survival. The stage was now set for a major international intervention that would redefine the nation's destiny. The atmosphere in Kabul was one of fear and uncertainty as the capital became a target of both internal purges and external threats. The once vibrant city was now a shadow of its former self, haunted by the specter of impending war. The Soviet leadership watched the situation in Afghanistan with growing concern, fearing that the collapse of the communist regime would create a vacuum on their southern border. This strategic anxiety would eventually lead to the decision to invade. Even before the Soviet invasion, thousands of Afghans were already fleeing the violence and repression of the communist regime. This early migration was a precursor to the massive refugee crisis that would soon engulf the entire region. The Soviet Union invaded on Christmas Eve 1979 to stabilize the crumbling communist government. This massive military intervention turned Afghanistan into a major battleground of the Cold War for the next 10 years. The Soviet forces, which peaked at around 115,000 troops, focused on securing the cities and main roads. However, they were unable to crush the Mujahideen resistance that operated with impunity from the rugged mountain terrain. The Mujahideen were a loose coalition of diverse ethnic and religious groups united only by their opposition to the foreign invaders. Supported by the US, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, they waged a relentless guerrilla war. The Soviets used scorched earth tactics, indiscriminately bombing rural areas to depopulate the Mujahideen strongholds. This led to a massive humanitarian crisis, with millions of civilians caught in the crossfire. The resistance groups received significant financial and military support from the international community, including Stinger missiles that challenged Soviet aerial dominance. These weapons were a major factor in turning the tide of the war in the late 1980s. The introduction of the Stinger missile in 1986 provided the Mujahideen with a powerful defense against the Soviet gunships. This technological shift significantly increased the cost of the war for the Soviet Union and boosted the morale of the resistance. The Mujahideen factions were often divided along ethnic and tribal lines, creating a fragmented and sometimes chaotic resistance movement. These internal divisions would eventually lead to the brutal civil war of the 1990s. The Soviet military suffered significant losses, with roughly 15,000 soldiers losing their lives in the conflict. The war became increasingly unpopular at home, contributing to the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union itself. The high human and economic cost of the war led to widespread disillusionment with the Soviet leadership. This internal pressure was a major factor in the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan in the late 1980s. The ascent of Mikhail Gorbachev to power in 1985 marked a fundamental shift in Soviet policy toward Afghanistan. Gorbachev sought an honorable exit from the bleeding wound of the Afghan war, leading to the Geneva Accords in 1988. The Geneva Accords provided a framework for the withdrawal of Soviet troops and the normalization of relations between Afghanistan and its neighbors. However, the agreement failed to address the internal political future of the nation. The Mujahideen factions rejected the Geneva Accords, vowing to continue their struggle until the communist regime was completely overthrown. This persistence of conflict would eventually lead to the collapse of the central government. As the Soviet troops withdrew, they left behind massive amounts of military hardware, which would later be used by various factions in the ensuing civil war. These weapons became a lethal legacy of the decade-long occupation. The atmosphere in the capital was one of intense anticipation and fear as the departure of the Soviets created a power vacuum. The nation was on the brink of another violent transition that would further devastate its people. The human toll of the war was staggering, with an estimated 1 to 1.5 million Afghans losing their lives. This represented nearly 11% of the pre-war population, leaving no family untouched by tragedy and loss. By 1982, over 4 million Afghans had fled to Pakistan and Iran, creating the largest refugee population in modern history. These massive camps became breeding grounds for future generations of radicalized youth. Thousands of Afghans were left permanently disabled by the conflict, with landmines continuing to claim lives long after the fighting had stopped. The physical and emotional scars of the war would take generations to heal. The war created millions of widows and orphans, further straining the already fragile social fabric of the nation. These vulnerable populations faced immense challenges in the absence of a stable and supportive state infrastructure. The educational and healthcare systems were completely dismantled in the rural areas, depriving an entire generation of their basic rights. This legacy of destruction would hinder the nation's recovery for decades to come. The national economy was shattered, with the agricultural base devastated by the scorched earth tactics of the war. Poverty and malnutrition became widespread, affecting the most vulnerable members of Afghan society. The conflict also caused significant environmental damage, with extensive deforestation and the destruction of irrigation systems. These ecological losses further complicated the survival of the rural population in the post-war era. The data from international organizations shows a nation that was systematically decimated by 10 years of high-intensity warfare. Every metric of human well-being had declined dramatically, leaving the nation in a state of absolute crisis. Comparing the stability of the early 1970s with the devastation of the late 1980s reveals the profound tragedy of the Afghan nation. A whole era of progress was erased by a decade of ideological and superpower conflict. The lost innocence of an entire generation is the true cost of the war, a debt that can never be fully repaid. The kites that once flew over a peaceful Kabul are now a distant memory in a sky filled with the smoke of conflict. The last Soviet troops withdrew in February 1989, leaving behind a nation in ruins and a fragile communist regime. The Soviets had suffered 15,000 deaths and failed to achieve their objective of a stable pro-Soviet state. The regime of Mohammad Najibullah, left without Soviet protection, managed to survive for another 3 years. However, the cessation of Soviet aid eventually led to its collapse in 1992 as the Mujahideen factions advanced. The fall of Najibullah marked the definitive end of communist rule in Afghanistan, but did not bring the promised peace. Instead, the various Mujahideen factions immediately turned on each other in a scramble for power. Following the collapse of the communist regime in 1992, the victorious Mujahideen factions turned their guns on each other. A brutal civil war for control of Kabul ensued, causing further destruction and civilian suffering in the capital. The city was divided into competing ethnic and political enclaves, with daily rocket attacks and street-to-street fighting. This period was characterized by extreme lawlessness and widespread human rights violations against the civilian population. Ahmad Shah Massoud, the legendary Tajik commander, attempted to stabilize the city but was constantly challenged by the rival Pashtun forces of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. This ethnic and factional strife completely paralyzed the central government. The people of Kabul, who had already suffered 10 years of war, were now trapped in a new and even more intimate form of violence. Food and water became scarce, and many residents were forced to flee their homes once again. International observers documented the fragmentation of the nation into various fiefdoms ruled by local warlords. The once unified state had completely disappeared, replaced by a patchwork of competing and often hostile authorities. Another wave of refugees fled the capital, seeking safety in the relatively stable areas of the north or crossing the borders once again. This internal displacement further complicated the nation's already dire humanitarian situation. The destruction of the city's infrastructure was almost complete, with hospitals, schools, and government buildings targeted by various factions. The Kabul of the early 1990s was a skeletal version of the cosmopolitan hub it once was. The anarchy and exhaustion of the population created the conditions for a new and even more extreme movement to emerge. The stage was now set for the rise of the Taliban from the south. The Taliban emerged in 1994 as a movement of religious students promising to end the lawlessness of the warlords. They quickly gained support from a population exhausted by decades of relentless warfare and internal strife. In September 1996, the Taliban captured Kabul and established the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. They imposed a strict and fundamental interpretation of Sharia law, effectively taking the nation back centuries in social progress. The movement, led by the reclusive Mullah Omar, promised to restore order and Islamic purity to the nation. However, their version of order came at a terrible cost to the rights and freedoms of the Afghan people. The Taliban quickly consolidated their power, disarming the various Mujahideen factions and imposing a centralized authority based on religious decrees. Their rule was characterized by extreme social conservatism and isolationism. The regime banned music, television, and most forms of artistic expression. Kite flying, the beloved national pastime, was also outlawed. Public executions at the city's stadium became a tool of social control and intimidation. Women were banned from education and the workforce and required to wear the burqa and be accompanied by a male chaperone. This exclusion of half the population devastated the healthcare and educational systems of the cities. The Taliban's ethnic cleansing campaigns, particularly against the Shia Hazaras, resulted in horrific massacres in cities like Mazar-e-Sharif. Thousands were killed for their faith and ethnicity in a systematic attempt to homogenize the nation. In 2001, the world watched in horror as the Taliban destroyed the ancient Bamiyan Buddhas, a symbol of Afghanistan's rich pre-Islamic history. It was a clear signal of their intent to erase any culture that didn't align with their vision. The regime's isolation from the international community led to a severe economic crisis and widespread famine. Despite their claims of bringing order, the Taliban's rule brought only more misery and repression for the majority of Afghans. Education was replaced by a narrow focus on religious indoctrination in state-run madrasas. This systematic removal of secular learning deprived a generation of the skills needed to build a modern and prosperous society. The healthcare system collapsed, with life expectancy falling and infant mortality rates rising to some of the highest in the world. The Taliban's neglect of public welfare had a devastating impact on the most vulnerable members of society. Another wave of refugees fled the country, seeking refuge from the Taliban's repression and the ongoing famine. These displacements further strained the international community's ability to provide humanitarian assistance to the Afghan people. The Taliban's hosting of al-Qaeda and its leader Osama bin Laden brought the nation back onto the center stage of global conflict. This strategic alliance would eventually lead to the catastrophic events of September 11th and the ensuing U.S. invasion. Documents from international human rights organizations show a regime that was systematic in its oppression of women and ethnic minorities. The Taliban's rule remains one of the darkest periods in modern Afghan history, a legacy of absolute intolerance. Against this tragic historical backdrop, Khaled Hosseini tells the story of Amir and Hassan. Their bond as children in 1970s Kabul represents the lost innocence of a nation before it was shattered by ideological and ethnic conflict. The annual Kite tournament of 1975 was a moment of peak joy for Amir, but it also became the site of his greatest betrayal. In a secluded alleyway, his cowardice would create a wound that would take a lifetime to heal. When the Soviets invaded, Amir and his father Baba were forced to flee, joining the millions of refugees on the hazardous path to Pakistan. They eventually found safety in the United States, trading their old life for the struggle of immigrants. In the little Kabul of Fremont, California, Amir built a new life, but the memory of his betrayal in Kabul continued to haunt him. The novel explores how the past can never be truly buried, as it always claws its way out. His journey of self-discovery and redemption is a testament to the power of the human heart to overcome even the most profound guilt. Amir's struggle is a reflection of the collective desire for atonement and a better future. The complex relationship between Amir and his father, Baba, is a central theme of the novel, exploring concepts of honor, expectations, and the weight of family secrets. Their bond is a powerful metaphor for the intergenerational legacy of conflict. In 2001, Amir received a call from an old family friend offering him a way to be good again. He returned to Kabul under Taliban rule to rescue Hassan's son, Sohrab, and confront the sociopathic bully of his past. Amir's journey of redemption mirrors the arduous path of a nation attempting to find its way back from the darkness of extremism and war. It is a story of personal courage in the face of absolute national tragedy. The return to Kabul is a moment of profound confrontation with his own past and the reality of his nation's suffering. Amir's actions in rescuing Sohrab are a step toward breaking the cycle of betrayal and violence. The introduction of Sohrab into his life provides Amir with a final chance to atone for his childhood sins. Their relationship is a symbol of hope for the next generation of Afghans, both at home and in the diaspora. The US-led invasion in late 2001 swiftly toppled the Taliban regime, following their refusal to hand over the architects of the September 11th attacks. This marked the beginning of a new chapter of international intervention and democratic experiment. The Bonn Agreement established an interim government led by Hamid Karzai, bringing together various ethnic and political factions. For the first time in decades, there was a sense of cautious optimism for a unified and peaceful Afghanistan. A new constitution was adopted in 2004, establishing a presidential republic and formally recognizing the rights of all ethnic and religious groups. This was a landmark moment for the Hazara, who were granted equal citizenship for the first time. The nation witnessed its first ever presidential and parliamentary elections, with millions of Afghans exercising their democratic rights for the first time. This was a powerful demonstration of the people's desire for a representative and stable government. The following decades saw significant improvements in education and healthcare, funded by billions in international aid. By 2018, over 3.5 million girls were enrolled in school, a dramatic shift from the zero enrollment under the Taliban. Women returned to public life, making up 22% of the workforce and occupying significant seats in parliament. The overall literacy rate improved from 12% in the 1970s to 43% by the year 2020. The media landscape flourished, with dozens of independent television stations, radio outlets, and newspapers emerging across the country. This era of free expression allowed for a diverse range of voices and perspectives to be heard. The art scene was revitalized, with local musicians, artists, and filmmakers contributing to a renewed sense of national pride and cultural identity. This cultural renaissance was a sign of the nation's resilience and creative spirit. The Afghan economy grew significantly, with GDP rising from $4 billion in 2002 to $20 billion by 2020. This growth, however, remained heavily dependent on foreign military and civilian aid, making it vulnerable to withdrawal. Significant investments in infrastructure, such as the Ring Road, aim to connect the country's major cities and foster regional trade. These projects were seen as vital for the nation's long-term economic development and stability. The urban middle class expanded, contributing to a vibrant consumer market and a sense of growing prosperity in the cities. However, the benefits of this economic growth were not always evenly distributed across the rural areas. Life expectancy improved from 45 years under the Taliban to 65 years by 2020. Infant mortality rates fell by 50%, reflecting the massive investment in basic healthcare infrastructure across the nation's provinces. Widespread vaccination campaigns and improvements in maternal health services saved thousands of lives each year. These public health achievements were a testament to the dedication of both international and local health professionals. The training of thousands of new doctors, nurses, and midwives was a critical component of the nation's health strategy. These newly skilled professionals provided the foundation for a more resilient and effective healthcare system. The withdrawal of international forces in August 2021 led to the swift collapse of the Republic and the return of the Taliban. This catastrophic shift has plunged the nation back into economic isolation and social regression for its citizens. GDP plummeted by 24% in a single year, and by 2022, nearly 97% of the population was at risk of falling below the poverty line. Once again, girls are barred from education beyond the 6th grade in most regions. The humanitarian crisis has intensified, with millions of Afghans facing acute food insecurity and a lack of basic services. The international community continues to struggle with how to provide assistance without legitimizing the Taliban regime. The social and economic progress of the last 20 years is being rapidly undone, leaving the nation's future in a state of profound uncertainty. The resilient spirit of the Afghan people is once again being tested to its very limits. Khaled Hosseini's The Kite Runner remains a vital piece of literature that helps the world understand the human cost of these political shifts. It bridges the gap between the cold statistics of war and the beating heart of the people. The story of Amir and Hassan is the story of Afghanistan, a nation that has suffered immense betrayal but continues to seek a way to be good again. The kite flying over Kabul remains a powerful symbol of an enduring and resilient spirit. The novel's themes of guilt, redemption, and the persistence of the past resonate with readers of all backgrounds, fostering a deeper empathy for the Afghan experience. It is a reminder that our shared humanity is stronger than any ideological divide. Hosseini's own humanitarian work through his foundation continues to provide support for refugees and vulnerable populations in Afghanistan. His commitment to the people of his homeland is an inspiration to all who seek to make a difference. We have traversed over 80 years of history, from the golden age of monarchy to the dark years of extremism. The resilience of the Afghan people in the face of such absolute tragedy remains one of the greatest legacies of human history. As we reflect on this historical odyssey, we are reminded that while the past cannot be changed, the future is still unwritten. The hope for a peaceful and unified Afghanistan continues to soar like a kite in the vast mountain sky. The mountains that have witnessed centuries of conflict also hold the promise of a renewed and stable future. The enduring beauty of the Afghan landscape is a reflection of the strength and dignity of its people. In every child's laughter and every kite that flies, there is a seed of hope for a nation that has known too much sorrow. The story of Afghanistan is a story of survival and the persistent quest for a better tomorrow. The journey of redemption is never easy, but it is necessary for the healing of both individuals and nations. The lessons from The Kite Runner and the history of Afghanistan serve as a guide for our own paths toward truth and reconciliation. As we look back at the Paris of Central Asia, we are reminded of what is possible when a nation is at peace with itself and the world. This memory serves as a powerful inspiration for the rebuilding of a stable and prosperous Afghanistan. The vibrant life of the markets today is a testament to the indestructible spirit of the Afghan people. Despite the challenges, they continue to work, trade, and dream of a future where their children can fly kites in a sky free of conflict. Unity and reconciliation among all ethnic and religious groups is the only path toward a lasting peace in Afghanistan. The lessons of history and the power of shared humanity are the foundation on which this future must be built. The kite flying high in the sky is a reminder that the Afghan spirit can never be truly broken. It is a symbol of freedom, hope, and the enduring quest for redemption that transcends even the darkest chapters of history. Our academic study of the history and social landscape of Afghanistan concludes with a message of hope. The power of knowledge and literature to foster understanding and empathy is our greatest tool for building a more peaceful world. The sun rises over the Hindu Kush, signaling the beginning of a new day and the possibility of a new era for Afghanistan. The journey continues, and the hope for a redeemed and unified nation remains as strong as ever. May the kites of Afghanistan always find the wind, and may the people of this beautiful nation find the peace and prosperity they so richly deserve. Thank you for witnessing this historical odyssey with us. The story remains a legacy for the future, a testament to the resilience of the heart. Literature is the bridge that connects us to the truth of the human experience across time and across borders. As the sun sets over the city, we are reminded of the long journey we have taken together. The history of Afghanistan is a story of loss, but also of an indestructible hope that continues to soar high. From the monarchy to the present day, we have witnessed the transformation of a nation. The resilience and dignity of the Afghan people remain the most profound lesson of this historical study. We have reached the end of our profound journey through the history and soul of Afghanistan as seen through the lens of The Kite Runner. The story of Amir and Hassan reminds us that the quest for redemption is a universal human experience. Literature has the power to illuminate the darkest corners of our collective history, giving voice to those who have been silenced by conflict. The resilience of the human spirit in the face of absolute tragedy remains our greatest legacy and hope. We hope this analytical study has provided you with a deeper understanding of the complex factors that have shaped the destiny of this nation. The pursuit of knowledge is the first step toward a more empathetic and peaceful future for all. The history of Afghanistan is a reminder that the past is never truly dead. It remains a part of us, shaping our choices and our potential for growth. May we all find the courage to face our own pasts with honesty and integrity. As we look toward the horizon, we see the enduring spirit of a nation that refuses to be broken. The story of the Kite Runner is a testament to the indestructible power of friendship and the necessity of personal atonement. Thank you for your attention and for your interest in the historical and social odyssey of Afghanistan. It has been a privilege to share this detailed analysis with you today. We wish you all the best in your own journeys. May the kites in your life always find the favorable wind, and may you find the courage to chase the ultimate truth. I wish you peace, prosperity, and a life filled with profound meaning and many blessings. Thank you for joining us. I wish you all the happiness and peace that life can offer. May your journey be guided by the light of understanding and the strength of the human spirit. Until we meet again, stay safe and keep seeking the truth. 구독과 좋아요를 눌러주세요. 감사합니다. Thank you for joining us on this profound journey through history and literature. Until we meet again in the next chapter of our story. Goodbye.